The morning my daughter-in-law moved my things into garbage bags, she was humming. I heard her from the hallway. A little tune, light and easy, like she was tidying up after a dinner party. I stood there in my slippers with my hand on the wall, and I thought, she doesn't know I'm here. And for a few seconds I just listened. Humming. The sound of cardboard boxes being dragged across hardwood. The squeak of tape being pulled off a roll. That was the morning I understood what kind of woman my son had married. Let me back up. My name doesn't matter much for this story. What matters is that I'm 63 years old. I spent 31 years working for a civil engineering firm in Columbus, Ohio, and in all that time I raised one son, my boy, Nathaniel, mostly on my own after his mother passed when he was 9. I worked overtime. I packed his lunches. I taught him to drive in an empty church parking lot on a Sunday morning, the two of us laughing when he clipped the curb the first time. He was a good kid, became a good man. I believe that completely. He met Simone at a conference in Atlanta when he was 34. She was sharp, well-dressed, the kind of woman who makes a strong first impression. When he brought her home for Thanksgiving that first year, she complimented my cooking, asked thoughtful questions about my career, and helped clear the table without being asked. I liked her. I told Nathaniel afterward, she seems like someone who means what she says. He beamed. He was in love. I was happy for him. They married 2 years later. I gave a toast at the rehearsal dinner that made half the room cry, including Nathaniel. I meant every word. What I didn't know then, what I had no way of knowing, was that I had just toasted my own displacement. It started small. These things always do. The first Christmas after the wedding, Simone suggested they spend the holiday with her family in Phoenix. Just this once, since her parents are getting older. Of course, I said. That's fine. The following Easter, she had a work thing. The summer after that, they were renovating the kitchen. There was always a reason that made perfect sense on its own and only formed a pattern when you laid them all side by side and stepped back. By the time Nathaniel's 42nd birthday came around, I hadn't been to their house in 14 months. When I mentioned that, gently during one of our phone calls, he got quiet in the way that meant he'd been coached on what not to say. Dad, she just needs space to build her own family traditions. It's not personal. I let it go. I told myself he was right. People need to build their own lives. I'd done the same thing after I got married. I understood that. But then my hip went bad. It wasn't sudden. It had been grinding for 2 years, the kind of pain that starts as an inconvenience and slowly becomes the whole day. My orthopedic surgeon was direct about it. I needed a replacement. I'd need 6 to 8 weeks of recovery, and I could not be alone in the house during that time. I had a 2-story colonial in Westerville with a master bedroom upstairs and a bathroom the size of a closet on the main floor. The physical therapist told me plainly that without someone to help me navigate those early weeks, I was looking at a serious fall risk. I called Nathaniel. I explained the situation calmly. I wasn't asking to move in permanently. I had my own house, my own life. I was asking if I could recover at their place for a few weeks. They had a guest room on the ground floor. I'd seen it once, 2 Christmases ago, with a queen bed and its own bathroom. I wasn't asking for much. He said he'd talk to Simone. He called back 3 days later. The guest room, he said, was being converted into a home office. There wasn't really space. Had I looked into recovery centers? Some of them were quite nice these days. He'd researched a few in the Columbus area. I sat with the phone in my hand for a long time after we hung up. I had a neighbor, a widow named Faye, 71, who'd known me since I first moved into the neighborhood. And she was the one who finally said what I hadn't let myself think. Your son's wife doesn't want you in that house, and your son isn't going to fight her on it. She said it gently, over coffee, with her hands folded on the table, and I hated how clearly she was right. I had the surgery. I recovered in a rehabilitation facility 30 minutes from my house. It was clean and the staff was kind. But I lay awake the first 3 nights thinking about the guest room with the queen bed and the private bathroom, and the way my son had said, quite nice these days, like he was reviewing hotels. Nathaniel visited once, on a Saturday, for about 90 minutes. He brought flowers from a gas station and couldn't quite meet my eyes. Simone did not come. Here is where I need to tell you about the house. When Nathaniel's mother passed, she left behind a modest life insurance policy and a piece of property. A 4-bedroom craftsman-style house on Elmwood Drive in a neighborhood that had, over the past 20 years, become significantly more valuable. It had been in her family. She left it to me with the understanding that it would eventually pass to Nathaniel. I'd rented it out for years, steady income, well-maintained tenants. By the time of my hip surgery, the house was worth close to $400,000. I'd had it appraised the year before, just to know. I had not yet updated my will. I mention this because I think Simone knew exactly what that house was worth. I think she'd known for some time. 2 months after I got home from the rehabilitation facility, Nathaniel called to tell me they wanted to talk to me about something. Could I come to dinner on Saturday? I said yes. I was still using a cane at that point, but I drove myself. I wanted to show I was fine. I wanted them to see I didn't need anyone's help. Dinner was polished. Simone had made something complicated involving salmon and a reduction sauce. She was warm and attentive, refilled my water twice, asked about my recovery. It felt rehearsed, but I told myself I was being uncharitable. After the plates were cleared, Nathaniel folded his hands on the table the way he does when he's nervous. He said they'd been doing a lot of thinking. He said they loved me. He said they were worried about me living alone in that house long term, especially after the hip. He said the upkeep was a lot for one person. He said there were some wonderful 55-plus communities in the Columbus area, a few of them really lovely, with activities and medical staff on call, and then Simone slid a brochure across the table. I looked at it. I looked at her. I looked at my son. "You want me to sell my house and move into a retirement community," I said. Nathaniel said it wasn't like that. Simone said she just wanted what was best for me. She had a way of saying things with a kind expression that made it very hard to argue without sounding difficult. I picked up the brochure. I set it back down. I said I'd think about it. I drove home and sat in my kitchen until midnight. I thought about the house on Elmwood Drive, the one Nathaniel's mother had loved. I thought about what $400,000 meant to a couple who had a mortgage and 2 car payments and a lifestyle I suspected cost more than what Nathaniel's salary fully supported. I thought about how Simone had hummed while she packed my things into garbage bags. Wait, I'm getting ahead of myself. That came later. I called my attorney on Monday morning. He's a man I've trusted for 20 years, solid and unsentimental. I told him everything. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he said, "Have you updated your estate documents recently?" I told him no, not in several years. He said, "Let's fix that." We spent 2 hours in his office that week. I updated my will. I changed the beneficiary structure on the Elmwood property. Without going into every detail, I made sure that if anything happened to me, the distribution of my estate would not be automatic or uncomplicated. I also, at my attorney's suggestion, had a long and specific conversation with a financial advisor about making certain assets less accessible without legal process. I did not tell Nathaniel any of this. What I did instead was tell him I'd been thinking about their suggestion. I told him they might be right. I told him the house on Elmwood was a lot to manage, and maybe it made sense to liquidate that asset and use the proceeds to fund a more comfortable living situation. I watched Simone's posture change when I said this. She straightened slightly. There was something behind her eyes that she was working to keep still. I said I just needed a little time to get my thoughts in order. I said I'd like to spend a few weeks with them, if the offer still stood, to think it through properly. No rush, just some time around family while I made a major decision. I watched Simone. I watched her calculate. "Of course," she said. "The guest room is all yours." I moved in on a Wednesday in early November. I brought 2 bags and my reading glasses and a bottle of bourbon I've been slowly working through since 2019. The guest room had been hastily converted back from an office. There was still a printer in the corner and a power strip on the floor, but the bed was made and there were fresh towels. Simone was pleasant. Nathaniel was relieved. He thought his father and his wife had finally reached an understanding. He was right in a way. We had. For the first week I was quiet and easy to have around. I cooked breakfast twice. I fixed a leaky faucet under the kitchen sink that had apparently been dripping for months. I watched the news in my room and went to bed early. I was a model house guest. I was also paying close attention. It didn't take long. Simone was not a careless woman, but she was a confident one, and confident people sometimes underestimate the observational patience of a 63-year-old man with nowhere to be and a creaky hip that made sleeping past 5 in the morning impossible. The first thing I noticed was the calls. She took them in the back of the yard, or in her car in the garage with the engine off. Always with the door closed. Always with a particular quality of stillness that she didn't carry in ordinary conversation. I'm not a paranoid man. I didn't eavesdrop. But I noticed. The second thing I noticed was a conversation she had with Nathaniel one evening when they thought I was asleep. I wasn't. The walls in their house are not thick. She was asking about the timeline. When would I be ready to make a move? Whether my attorney had been involved yet. Whether Nathaniel had thought about what a power of attorney arrangement might look like. She said the words, while he's still capable of deciding clearly in a tone of voice that was genuinely caring, which was the most unsettling part. My son said he thought it was too soon to push. He said I was still sharp. He didn't want to make me feel pressured. She said she understood, but that these windows didn't stay open forever. I lay in that guest room and stared at the ceiling for a long time. I called my attorney the next morning from the parking lot of a grocery store 2 miles away. I told him what I'd heard. He asked me how I wanted to proceed. I told him I wanted to see how far this went before I made any moves. He said he understood but recommended I document everything I could. Dates, conversations, anything specific. I bought a small notebook at the grocery store and started that afternoon. Over the next 3 weeks, it escalated. Simone began bringing up the Elmwood property more directly. Not aggressively, she was too careful for that, but she'd mention it in passing. A friend of hers had used a particular real estate attorney and had a wonderful experience. She'd read that the market in that neighborhood was strong right now. She wondered aloud whether renting was still the best use of the asset, given carrying costs and management fees. Each comment was separate, deniable, reasonable on its own. But they came at a rhythm that felt designed. One afternoon, she sat down across from me at the kitchen table with what I can only describe as a prepared expression. She said she'd been thinking about my situation. She said she wanted to help me simplify things. She had a name she'd like me to consider. A financial planner she trusted, someone who could help restructure my holdings in a way that would be less stressful to manage. She pushed a card across the table. I picked it up. I thanked her. I said I'd think about it. That evening, while Simone was at her book club and Nathaniel was working late, I went through the kitchen drawer, where she kept take-out menus and miscellaneous papers. I know how that sounds, but my attorney had told me to document. And what I found in that drawer was a printed email. She'd apparently used the household printer without thinking, from someone I didn't recognize, discussing the estimated proceeds from a property sale, legal fees, and something referred to as a transfer timeline. My name was in the email. So was the address of the house on Elmwood Drive. I photographed it with my phone. I put it back exactly where I found it. The next morning I called my attorney. I also called my accountant, a woman I've worked with for 16 years. And I called a man I'd known since we were both young engineers, starting out in the same office 35 years ago. A man who had, since then, become one of the better estate litigation attorneys in Central Ohio. We had lunch that Friday. I told him everything. He said, "You're going to be fine, but we need to move." Over the following 10 days, we moved. I won't go through every legal detail because it's dense and some of it is still being resolved. But here is the shape of what happened. The Elmwood property was formally transferred into a trust structure that my attorney had been quietly preparing for the previous 2 weeks. The trust had specific terms. Nathaniel was named as an eventual beneficiary, but the structure meant that no one, not Nathaniel, not Simone, not anyone acting with their authorization, could liquidate, transfer, or leverage that property without a legal process that would take months and leave a clear paper trail. I also, very quietly, began staying at my neighbor Faye's guest room several nights a week. I told Nathaniel and Simone I was helping her with some household projects. I was in fact meeting with my attorneys and making sure that when the moment came, I was not in their house. That moment came on a Tuesday. I had gone back to pick up the last of my things. I'd been gradually moving items out, a few books at a time, my good coat, the small wooden box where I keep letters from Nathaniel's mother. I let myself in with the key they'd given me. The house was quiet. I thought Simone was at work. She wasn't. I heard her before I saw her, that humming, light and easy from the direction of the guest room. I walked down the hall and stood in the doorway. She had 2 large garbage bags, already partially full, and she was moving through the closet with the focused efficiency of someone who'd been planning this for a while. My things, my remaining books, my extra shoes, a photograph of Nathaniel at his college graduation that I'd put on the nightstand. She startled when she saw me. For just a moment, a fraction of a second, her face showed something unguarded. Then the composed expression came back. "I was just organizing," she said. I looked at the garbage bags. "I see that," I said. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I took the photograph of Nathaniel off the nightstand where it still sat, tucked it under my arm, and picked up the last bag I'd come to retrieve. I told her I appreciated the hospitality. I told her I was heading home. She said, "What about the property discussion? You said you were still thinking." I said, "I've finished thinking." I walked out of that house. I drove back to Westerville. I sat in my own kitchen, in my own chair, and I drank a small glass of that bourbon I've been working through since 2019. 2 days later, my attorney sent a formal letter to Nathaniel and Simone outlining the new trust structure and making clear that any future communications regarding my estate should be directed through legal counsel. The letter was precise and professional, and, I'm told, came as a considerable shock. Nathaniel called me that evening. He was upset, not furious, but the kind of rattled that comes when reality lands differently than you'd arranged it in your mind. He said he didn't understand what had happened. He said he thought we were working together. He said Simone was devastated. I asked him carefully whether he had known about the email I'd found in the kitchen drawer. The one about the transfer timeline. There was a long pause. "What email?" he said. And the way he said it, not defensive, but genuinely lost, told me something I needed to know. I don't think Nathaniel understood the full shape of what Simone had been doing. I think he'd been fed a version of events that made it all sound like concern. I think he loved me and had been persuaded, slowly and skillfully, that the most caring thing was also the most convenient thing. That was the hardest part to sit with. Not the anger, the grief. I told him I wasn't cutting him off. I told him I loved him. I also told him I needed some time, and that if he wanted to understand what had actually happened over the past 2 years, I would walk him through it. All of it, the dates, the conversations, the notebook, when he was ready to hear it without defending her first. He said he'd call me back. He did. 3 weeks later, on a Sunday afternoon, he came to my house alone. He sat at my kitchen table, and I made coffee, and I told him everything, from the canceled Thanksgivings all the way to the garbage bags. I showed him the photograph of the email. I showed him the notebook. He was quiet for a long time when I finished. He looked out the window at the backyard. Then he looked at me and said, "Dad, I'm sorry. I didn't see it." I told him I believed him. I also told him I needed him to see it now. We're not back to where we were. I don't know if we'll get there. But we're talking, which is more than I had 2 months ago. He's been over for dinner 4 times since that Sunday. He came alone the first 3 times. The 4th time, Simone came too. She was very polite. She did not bring up the house on Elmwood Drive. I'm still living in my house in Westerville. My hip is better than it's been in years. The Elmwood property has new tenants, a young couple with a small dog who sent me a thank you card after they moved in, which I put on the refrigerator. I think about what Faye said to me that afternoon over coffee, before any of this had fully unfolded. "Your son's wife doesn't want you in that house." She was right. But here's the thing she didn't say, the thing I've had to work out on my own over the past several months. It was never really about the house. It was about whether I was willing to become invisible, whether I'd accept being managed and moved and packaged away, because it was easier for everyone if I just agreed that my time was up. I'm 63, my hip is fixed. I have a good bourbon, a good attorney, and a neighbor who makes the best coffee in Westerville. My time is not up. I watch the young couple's dog run around the yard on Elmwood Drive sometimes, when I stop by to check on the property. Little thing, not much bigger than a football, absolutely delighted with the grass and the garden and the whole enormous fact of being alive. I stand at the fence for a minute and watch it, and I think, yeah, same, buddy, same.